There is a rule as simple as it is terrifying that has echoed through the corridors of history. When the price of gold doubles, empires fall. It's a pattern etched into the rise and fall of civilizations, a silent alarm that signals the final act of a great power. This isn't just a story about economics. It's a story about human nature, about the allure of easy money, and about the inevitable consequences of breaking the fundamental laws of value. For centuries, a blueprint for collapse has been passed down, starting with the debasement of a nation's currency. It's a strategy that has consistently created unimaginable wealth for a select few, while bringing ruin and despair to the many. The mechanism is deceptively straightforward, a fatal sequence of events that begins with a government's insatiable appetite for spending. Whether driven by endless wars, lavish projects, or the simple desire to maintain power, the state eventually spends far more than it collects. Faced with a fiscal cliff, it turns to the one tool that promises a painless solution: the printing press, or its ancient equivalent. By creating more money out of thin air, the government can temporarily cover its debts. But this act of creation is also an act of destruction. Each new coin, each new note, dilutes the value of all the money already in circulation. This is the essence of currency debasement. As the currency is devalued, inflation begins its silent, corrosive work. The price of bread, oil, and land begins to climb, slowly at first, then with accelerating speed. For the ordinary citizen, life becomes a frantic race to keep up. Their savings, once a symbol of security, evaporate into worthlessness. Their wages, no matter how hard they work, buy less and less. The very fabric of society begins to tear as trust in the currency, and by extension, trust in the government, disintegrates. Amid this chaos, a different story unfolds for the wealthy elites. Aware of the government's game, they move to protect their fortunes, converting their soon-to-be worthless currency into tangible assets that hold their value: land, art, and, above all, gold. They not only survive the collapse, they often profit from it, purchasing the assets of the ruined middle class for a fraction of their worth. This is the blueprint of collapse, and its first and most famous victim was Rome. In the early days of the Roman Empire, its economic strength was built on the foundation of a single, trusted coin, the denarius. Under the reign of Emperor Augustus, it contained over 95% pure silver, a standard of quality that was recognized and respected across the known world. This stable currency was the lifeblood of a flourishing economy. It fueled trade, encouraged long-term investment, and allowed for the unprecedented prosperity of the Pax Romana. For a time, it seemed that Rome had discovered the secret to perpetual stability. But the seeds of its destruction were already being sown in the very halls of power where its success was being celebrated. The slow, insidious process of debasement began under Emperor Nero in 64 AD, faced with the immense cost of rebuilding Rome after the Great Fire and his own extravagant spending. Nero made a fateful decision. He reduced the silver content of the denarius by about 10%, allowing him to mint more coins from the same amount of precious metal. It was a subtle change, almost unnoticeable to the common citizen, but it set a dangerous precedent. His successors, each facing their own financial pressures, followed his lead. Emperor Trajan, despite his reputation as one of the 5 good emperors, further reduced the silver content to fund his ambitious public works and military campaigns. Under Commodus, the debasement accelerated, and by the time the Severan dynasty took power, the policy had become a desperate systemic tool to finance a bloated military and a corrupt bureaucracy. By 250 AD, the once proud denarius was a ghost of its former self. The coin, which had once been nearly pure silver, was now a bronze token with a thin, deceptive silver wash. It contained less than 5% silver, and in some cases, virtually none at all. The consequences were catastrophic. The Roman economy was consumed by a firestorm of hyperinflation. Prices for basic goods, like wheat, skyrocketed by thousands of percent. Soldiers, paid in the worthless coins, frequently mutinied, their loyalty for sale to the highest bidder. The economic chaos fueled unprecedented political instability. In the 50-year period known as the Crisis of the 3rd Century, at least 26 different men were proclaimed emperor, most meeting a violent end after only a short time on the throne. The empire fractured, the social order collapsed, and Rome was pushed to the very brink of annihilation. From the ashes of this economic cataclysm, a profound lesson emerged, one that the survivors learned through bitter experience. As the state's currency became worthless, it ceased to be a measure of value. The only thing that retained its purchasing power, the only true store of wealth, was gold. Citizens who had trusted in the silver denarius or in any form of paper promises from the state saw their life savings wiped out. They were reduced to poverty, their security shattered. But those who had the foresight to hold physical gold, like the aureus coin, were able to weather the storm. They could still buy food, pay for protection, and preserve their family standing. Gold was no longer just a metal. It was a lifeboat in a sea of financial ruin, the ultimate arbiter of who survived and who perished. More than a millennium later, history would find a new stage for this old tragedy in the Spanish Empire. In the 1500s, Spain stood at the apex of its power, a global hegemon fueled by a seemingly infinite stream of treasure from its colonies in the New World. From the mines of Potosi and Zacatecas, fleets of galleons carried mountains of silver and gold back to Seville. The Spanish crown, believing it possessed an inexhaustible source of wealth, embarked on an era of unprecedented spending. It financed immense armies to fight wars across Europe, from the Netherlands to Italy, and funded a lavish court, all on the assumption that it could simply buy whatever it needed. This flood of new money, however, was not met with a corresponding increase in the production of real goods and services. Spain was importing money, not creating real wealth. The result was a textbook case of demand-pull inflation, a phenomenon so severe it would be known to history as the price revolution. As the sheer quantity of silver coins in circulation exploded, their individual value plummeted. Over the course of the 16th century, prices in Spain quadrupled. The cost of living soared, making it impossible for the average artisan or farmer to get by. The very silver that was supposed to make Spain the richest nation on earth was, in fact, poisoning its domestic economy from within. Compounding the problem was the government's own fiscal recklessness. Despite the massive influx of colonial wealth, the Spanish monarchy consistently spent far beyond its means. It borrowed heavily from German and Genoese bankers, using future silver shipments as collateral. But the costs of its global ambitions always outpaced the revenue, leading to a cycle of crippling debt. The government defaulted on its loans repeatedly in 1557, 1575, and 1596, each time shattering a generation of lenders and creating financial chaos across Europe. The Spanish middle class was decimated, crushed between soaring inflation and crushing taxes. Meanwhile, the aristocracy and well-connected elites used their access and knowledge to hoard physical gold and silver, consolidating their wealth and power as the rest of the country sank into poverty. Spain, the empire that had once held the world in its hands, slowly collapsed under the weight of its own silver. This blueprint of collapse, perfected in Rome and repeated in Spain, was not an isolated phenomenon. It is a timeless story of human ambition and financial gravity, a pattern that would play out again and again in civilizations across the globe, from Ming Dynasty China to the British Empire. In a world built on ambition and greed, this is a hidden chapter in financial history, a story of power, manipulation, and lessons the world refused to learn. From the corridors of Wall Street to the boardrooms where nations are shaped, this narrative explores the rise, the fall, and the silent consequences that changed how money moves. Every moment builds towards a revelation, how decisions made in pursuit of profit reshaped economies, altered lives, and defined the meaning of value itself. As the truth unfolds, one question remains: did we master money, or did money master us? In our last exploration, we witnessed how the debasement of currency brought the mighty Roman and Spanish empires to their knees, but that destructive blueprint didn't vanish with them. It has reappeared time and time again throughout history, simply changing its form to suit the era. The age-old practice of clipping coins or mixing precious metals with cheaper substitutes has evolved. In the modern world, it has taken on a far more sophisticated, yet equally devastating form, the overprinting of paper currency. This is the story of how fiat money currency backed by nothing but government decree became the new tool of debasement, continuing a cycle of ruin that has toppled dynasties and reshaped the global order. This pattern of financial self-destruction found a stark and cautionary expression in the East, during the reign of China's Ming Dynasty. In the 14th century, the dynasty introduced a revolutionary concept, a national, government issued paper currency known as the Great Ming Treasure Note. Initially, it seemed like a brilliant innovation, freeing the empire from its reliance on cumbersome metal coins. The government promised that these notes were as good as the silver and bronze they were meant to replace. But the temptation of the printing press proved too great. Faced with mounting expenses, military campaigns, and lavish imperial projects, the Ming court began to print money with reckless abandon. With each new issuance, the value of the Great Ming Treasure Note plummeted. The government printed vast quantities to pay its soldiers and fund its bureaucracy, flooding the economy with worthless paper. Hyperinflation took hold. Prices for basic goods like rice and salt skyrocketed, sometimes doubling in a matter of months. Ordinary citizens, who were forced to accept the notes, saw their life savings evaporate. Trust in the government and its paper money completely collapsed. People began to refuse the official currency, reverting to a more ancient and reliable form of wealth: silver. The gray metal, which had been used as money for centuries, became the only medium of exchange anyone trusted. The Ming government, realizing it had lost control, was eventually forced to reverse its policy. In a humiliating turn, it had to begin accepting silver for tax payments, effectively admitting that its own paper money was worthless. This created a new and equally severe problem. The empire's demand for silver suddenly soared, but the supply, dependent on foreign trade and limited domestic mines, could not keep up. This severe silver shortage created economic paralysis. Trade stagnated, taxes went uncollected, and the government grew weak and unable to pay its armies. The economic despair fueled social unrest, culminating in a massive peasant rebellion led by Li Ziqiang, which ultimately stormed the capital and brought the once glorious Ming dynasty to a calamitous end in 1644. The empire that had pioneered paper money was, in the end, destroyed by it. Centuries later, on the other side of the globe, the British Empire would face its own financial reckoning, though the mechanism of its decline was different. After the devastation of World War II, Britain stood victorious but financially broken. The nation was saddled with enormous debt, its industries were battered, and its once unrivaled economic power was fading. Yet, it clung to the illusion of its former glory, stubbornly maintaining the pound sterling at an artificially high value, pegged to both gold and the US dollar. This overvaluation made British exports incredibly expensive on the world market. Countries recovering from the war, like Germany and Japan, could produce goods far more cheaply, and British factories found it impossible to compete. The result was a chronic trade deficit. Britain was buying far more from the world than it was selling, and its gold and foreign currency reserves drained away at an alarming rate. The pound, the currency that had once financed global trade and empire, was living on borrowed time. The breaking point arrived in 1949, faced with imminent bankruptcy. The British government was forced to accept a painful reality. It announced a massive devaluation of the pound, slashing its value against the US dollar by over 30%. The pound's official peg to gold was also drastically reduced. In an instant, the financial might of the British Empire was exposed as a fragile facade. This single act signaled the end of the pound sterling's reign as the world's primary reserve currency. The financial center of the globe had decisively shifted from London to New York, and the once mighty empire began its final, inexorable retreat from the world stage. This transfer of power leads us directly to the United States and the modern incarnation of the debasement blueprint. For decades after World War II, the US dollar reigned supreme, its strength guaranteed by a promise. Any nation could exchange its dollars for a fixed amount of gold held in the vaults of Fort Knox. This system, known as the Bretton Woods Agreement, created a stable global financial order. But the United States, like the empires before it, began to overextend itself. The immense costs of the Vietnam War and expansive domestic social programs, known as guns and butter, were funded not by taxes, but by printing more dollars. Foreign nations, particularly France and Germany, watched with growing alarm as the U.S. printed money far in excess of the gold it held. They began to question the dollar's true value and started demanding gold in exchange for their dollar reserves, as was their right. A run on Fort Knox had begun. Faced with the prospect of watching America's gold supply completely disappear, President Richard Nixon made a fateful decision. On August 15, 1971, he appeared on television and announced that the United States would temporarily suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. The gold window was closed. That temporary suspension became permanent. In that moment, the US dollar, and by extension the entire global monetary system, became a pure fiat currency, backed by nothing but faith in the US government. The price of gold, now free from its official anchor, immediately began to soar. Within a few short years, it had more than doubled, then quadrupled. The ancient blueprint was repeating itself with perfect precision. Today, we are living in the consequences of that 1971 decision. Freed from the discipline of gold, the United States has been able to accumulate a national debt that would have been unimaginable to previous generations, a figure that now climbs into the tens of trillions. This debt has been financed by the Federal Reserve's ability to create money out of thin air. This continuous money printing devalues the savings of every person holding dollars, a slow and insidious tax that erodes wealth over time. The financial instability, the boom and bust cycles, and the widening gap between the rich and the poor are all symptoms of a monetary system unmoored from reality. The United States, following the well-trodden path of Rome, Spain, and Britain, is financing its empire with an ever-depreciating currency. The question is not if this system will fail, but when. So, what is the lesson for us, the ordinary people caught in this grand, repeating cycle of history? The lesson is as old as money itself. True wealth is not found in paper promises or digital entries on a government ledger. It is found in tangible, finite assets that cannot be printed into oblivion. Throughout history, through every currency collapse and imperial decline, real wealth has survived in the form of gold, silver, productive land, and other scarce, tangible resources. These are the assets that the powerful have always sought to accumulate for themselves, even as they force the masses to use depreciating fiat currencies. In our digital age, new forms of assets have emerged, like Bitcoin. And while they offer an alternative to the traditional system, they are not immune to the blueprint of control. Governments are already seeking ways to regulate, tax, and potentially seize these digital assets, just as they have done with every form of money that has challenged their authority. The fundamental conflict remains the same: the struggle to protect your wealth from the system designed to confiscate it. The powerful will always exploit the blueprint for their own gain. It is up to each of us to understand it and to position ourselves to survive it. We must look beyond the noise of daily market fluctuations and see the larger historical pattern at play. The warning signs are all around us. The doubling of gold's price in the 1970s was a clear signal that the American empire had begun its financial decline. As we witness its price surge again today, we must recognize it for what it is, a harbinger of the end of the current monetary era. The greatest transfer of wealth in human history is not a future event. It is already underway. Those who hold paper assets will see their wealth evaporate, while those who hold real, tangible assets will preserve and even grow their purchasing power. In a world built on ambition and greed, our journey uncovers a hidden chapter in financial history, a story of power, manipulation, and lessons the world refused to learn. From the corridors of Wall Street to the boardrooms where the fates of nations are shaped, this narrative explores the rise, the fall, and the silent consequences that changed how money moves. Every moment, every decision builds towards a revelation, how the pursuit of profit reshaped economies, altered lives, and ultimately defined the very meaning of value itself. As the truth of this historical blueprint unfolds, one fundamental question remains: did we master money, or did money master us? If you found this exploration of financial history enlightening, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you won't miss our next chapter in this critical story. Your engagement helps us continue to bring these hidden histories to light. Thank you for watching.